In the name of Allah, the most beneficent and merciful, I welcome you all in today's session. Today we are going to talk about interviewing candidates, which is chapter number 7 from your book. So first of all, let's start with what an interview is all about. An interview is basically a procedure designed to obtain information from a person through oral responses or oral inquiries. So generally, the format of the interview is oral. There are very few instances in which the interview question can be asked in written form. There are certain types of interviews. The first one can be selection interview, which we basically undertake for recruitment and selection. The second one would be appraisal interview, that after 1 year that the candidate is working for our company. So we'll evaluate his or her performance, and that performance evaluation interview would be taken up as appraisal interview. And then there can be exit interview, that supposedly if the person needs to leave the organization. So before the person leaves, we ask for an interview that what are the reasons and causes that person is going for switching. Then there are different formats. The two formats are written on the slide, and the third one I'll be telling you. The two formats are structured and unstructured, and there is another format which is known as semi-structured. The semi-structured would be actually the mix of the structured and the unstructured. When you talk about structured interview formats, all the questions are sorted out, all the expected answers are sorted out, and you have to fill a form when you are interviewing according to the requirement. And when you talk about unstructured interview, no question is pre-planned. No answer is actually expected in a particular sequence. So in unstructured formats, the interviewer can ask any question to the interviewee, and the interviewee would be having the free will to respond to that particular question. Now let's go through a little detail of what types of interviews are. First of all, when we talk about selection interview, it is said that a selection interview process or procedure is basically to get the design format to predict future job performance on the basis of applicants' oral responses to oral inquiries. When you talk about appraisal interview, it is said a discussion following a performance appraisal in which supervisor and employee discuss the employee's rating and possible remedial actions. Okay, and that is usually done after a year's time. And when you talk about exit interview, it is said that an interview to elicit information about the job or related matters to the employer, some insight into what's right and what's wrong about the firm. So why the person is leaving, that is the query we need to ask in the exit interview. Talking about the formats, it is said that unstructured or non-directive interview is an interview in which an unstructured conversational style interview is in which the interviewer pursues points of interest as they come up in response to questions. And when you talk about structured or directive interview, it is said that an interview following a set of sequence of questions. Okay, so that is basically predefined questions, and they are provided to the interviewer in a printed format, and the interviewer is supposed to ask the same set of questions to every candidate. Now, when you talk about interview content, there are different types of questions you need to address. The first type of questions are situational, related to situational interview. For example, a series of job-related questions that focus on how candidate would behave in a given situation. That is like situation interview. And when you talk about behavioral interview, a series of job-related questions that focus on how they reacted to actual situations in the past. That can be a little case study format as well. And when you talk about job-related interview, a series of job-related questions that focus on relevant past job-related behaviors. And In my next Zoom sessions, I'll be discussing with you the details of these interviews and the types of questions which you are supposed to face when you apply for a job. Now, there can be a stress interview as well. And when you talk about stress interview, it is said that an interview in which the interviewer seeks to make the applicant uncomfortable with occasionally rude questions that supposedly to spot sensitive applicants and those with low or high stress tolerance. Okay, so sometimes very weird questions can be asked. Sometimes the tone can be very rude. So it is all the matter that you want to see the stress level a candidate can bear uh, in the job. Okay, so for that matter, these type of interviews are arranged. Yet there are other types of questions as well, which are categorized as puzzle questions. And when you talk about puzzle questions, it is said that recruiters for technical, finance, and other types of jobs use questions to pose problems requiring unique, which is basically out of the box thinking, solutions to see how candidates think under pressure. Okay, so stress questions, puzzle questions, usually they are there to check the confidence of the applicant as well. They are there to check the tolerance level the person is having. And these types of questions are actually the deciding points that why would we prefer one candidate over the other. Uh, then your book is talking about personal or individual interviews. It is said that unstructured sequential interview is basically an interview in which each interviewer forms an independent opinion after asking different questions. Okay, so different people would be like asking the questions and every person would be having the judgment about the candidate. When you talk about structured sequential interview, it is said that an interview in which the applicant is interviewed sequentially by several persons, each rates the applicant on a standard form. Okay, so that is another format in which we can execute the interview session. And then there can be panel interview, an interview in which a group of interviewers questions the applicant. Okay, so 3, 4, 5, 6 people would be like sitting together and they'll be asking you different questions randomly, and then you have to respond all those questions accordingly. There is another expression or format of an interview that is known as a panel or board interview. It is said that an interview in which a group of interviewers questions the applicant. Okay. Then mass interview is another format in which a panel interviews several candidates simultaneously. Okay, so one candidate is not called in. The jury, the panel has the will to call more than one candidate at once, and they discuss the questions on spot with them in a format which is previously decided. There is another very interesting development in interviewing that is computerized interviews. And it is said that computerized selection interview is an interview in which a candidate oral and or computerized replies are obtained in response to computerized oral, visual or written questions and or situations. Okay, so that is like something when you talk about distant interviewing, particularly when the head office is supposedly abroad and you're going to hire the people from the local environment, so you can go for a computerized selection interview. The characteristics related to the computerized selection interview are basically reduces amount of time managers devote to interviewing unacceptable candidates. Applicants are most or more honest with computers, avoids problems of interpersonal interviews, and mechanical nature of computer-aided interview can leave an applicant dissatisfied because the face-to-face confrontation and the face-to-face expressions are communicating much more as compared to computerized interface. Now, there are certain factors which are affecting the interviews. The first factor identified is the first impression. Sometimes it is said that first impression is the last impression. Either true or not, it's a long debate. But one thing is for sure, that first impression is a long-lasting impression. Okay. So first impression, it is said that the tendency for interviewers to jump to conclusions, make snap judgments about candidates during the first few minutes of the interview. Okay, so interview session might be prolonged for 20 minutes, but the decision that either this person is going to be hired or not is usually taken up in first 1 or 2 minutes. There can be another issue related with the first impression, and that is the involvement of negative bias. And when we talk about negative bias, it is said that unfavorable information about an applicant influences interviewers more than does positive information. Okay, so we have to be sensitive about our favoritism. We should be sensitive about our biases and prejudice attitude, and we should be knowing that why such heuristics or judgmental shortcuts are coming in when you are judging the people based upon any particular characteristic. Another effect, basically, which is causing the contamination of interviews, that is basically misunderstanding the job. Which means that not knowing precisely what the job entails and what sort of candidate is best suited causes interviewers to make decisions based on incorrect stereotypes of what a job or good applicant is. So certain types of stereotype effects, certain types of halo effect, certain types of recency errors, severity errors, they can take place when you are judging the people. So we have to be sensitive that we should be minimizing our biases, we should be minimizing our favoritism, and that can only be done when there is a particular merit to deal with such situations. Then there is another problem which is known as candidate order error. And when you talk about candidate order errors, it is said that an error of judgment on the part of the interviewer due to interviewing one or more very good or very bad candidates just before the interview in question. Okay, because of the recency effect, the impression of the previous candidate would be on your mind, and when you'll be judging the next fellow, so obviously that impression would be taking over your decision. At the same time, you should be very much conscious about your nonverbal cues. It is said that nonverbal behavior and impression management is another factor which can affect the interview. It is said that interviewers' influences of the interviewee's personality from the way he or she acts in the interview have a large impact on the interviewer's rating of the interviewee. So nonverbal expressions, facial gestures, body language, these are all the things which are telling some psychological phenomena taking place in the interviewee. So one should be very much conscious about the nonverbal cues. It is said that clever interviewees attempt to manage the impression they present to persuade interviewers to view them more favorably. Okay, and sometimes even you need to do the rehearsal before going for an interview. So at the same time, effect of personal characteristics, including attractiveness, gender, race, all of these factors are going to affect the environment in which the interview is taking place. So interviewers tend to have a less favorable view of candidates who are physically unattractive or female for that concern, or a different racial, from a different racial background, or are disabled. So these are the phenomena which are usually taking place in the organizational facility. Now, bear in mind that there is a protected class. And when we talk about protected class in human resource management, we are concerned with Aboriginal, disabled, female, and minority. And if you are violating the protected class rules and rights, so that would mean that you are doing discrimination. And once you are doing discrimination, so obviously there can be a case against you related to the equal employment opportunity context. So one must be very much careful that they should not be having any biasness or favoritism whatsoever the case may be, as far as the candidate can perform the job effectively. At the same time, it is said that interviewer behavior affecting interview outcomes. For example, inadvertent advertently telegraphing expected answers, you are superimposing your own brain waves, talking so much that applicant have no time to answer questions. That's a big mistake. Letting the applicant dominate the interview, that is another big mistake. And acting more positively towards a favored or similar to the interviewer applicant. And that is the point where the biases would be taking place. Now, when you are designing and conducting the interview, there are certain steps, conventionally speaking, one must be following. It is said that use either situational questions, which are preferred, or behavioral questions that yield high criteria related validities. Okay, and one must be trying to come up with the reliability and the validity measures in the interviewing as well. As we discussed these two terms in the testing context, that there should be a test which is highly valid and highly reliable. Same is the case with the interview, that the reliability and the validity of the interview questions and the responses should always be there. So certain steps which you have to follow when you talk about structured situational interview. The first step is that you have to start from job analysis, in which you will be talking about the job description and job specification, and you'll be identifying that what particular characteristics are required in the candidate who is applying for a particular job. Once you are aware about those personality aspects, knowledge aspects, skills aspects, and ability aspects about a candidate, and you are also aware about the TDRs, it would be easy for you to craft the questions, that what are the appropriate questions related to these constructs. So when you talk about step 2, after the job analysis is done, that is to rate the job's main duties. You may set the hierarchy of priority, or you may even refer to the KRA, KPA, and the KPIs defined in the job. The step 3 is create interview questions. The step 4 is create benchmark answers. And the step 5 would be appoint the interview panel and conduct interviews. Okay. So how to conduct effective interview and structure your proceedings. Now, there are certain points you need to bear in your mind. The first aspect you need to bear in your mind is base questions on actual job duties. The second concern would be use job knowledge, situational and or behaviorally oriented questions, and objective criteria to evaluate the interviewee's responses. The third step can be train interviewers. The fourth step can be use the same questions with all candidates. The fifth step recommended is use descriptive rating scale, excellent, poor, fair, to rate answers. And the sixth aspect related to the effective job interview design would be talking about use multiple interviewers or panel interviews that can also reduce the biasness. And the seventh aspect would be, if possible, use a standardized interview form. The eighth thing you need to bear in mind is control the interview, the circumstances, the situations, the environment. And the ninth aspect you need to focus upon is take brief, unobtrusive notes during the interview. So these are all the concerns one must be bearing in mind when they are designing the effective interviews, particularly in case of structured environment. In addition to these, it is said that when you are conducting or trying to conduct an effective interview, prepare for the interview. And that is very important actually. It is said that secure a private room to minimize interruptions. Review the candidate's application and resume before you start the questions, and review the job specifications, that what type of person is needed actually for the job. And for job specification, you all may know that we are going to investigate the questions, or we are going to investigate the details related to knowledge, skills, abilities, and personality aspects. So the next aspect would be, once you are prepared for the interview, that you have to build a rapport. Okay, so basically you have to break the ice. You have to create a trust relationship between the candidate and yourself, so that the candidate is like feeling comfortable and is ready to respond to your questions in a comforting environment. So put the person at ease and ask questions afterwards. Follow your list of questions. Don't ask questions that can be answered yes or no. Okay, so the format of the question would be, which I'll be discussing in my next Zoom meeting, that the person is encouraged to speak like in detail, rather than simply nodding his head or saying yes and saying no, because from the yes and no answer you would not be able to capture the whole complexity of the situation or the detail what the candidate is trying to come up with. So these are few of the precautionary measures one must be taking and bearing in mind, that how and when and why interviews are conducted, and how you can develop a proper interview format in which the right candidate for the right job can be selected. So that is my first discussion session with you. We'll be joining in our next Zoom meeting, and from there we'll be talking in detail about the other aspects of interviewing and career counseling. So please hurry up and join the next Zoom meeting.